Store employees mocked a black woman trying to buy an expensive necklace, not realizing she was the owner's daughter-in-law. When her husband arrived, the truth was revealed. She wasn't just married to a millionaire. She was the majority shareholder of the entire jewelry chain through her grandmother's inheritance. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The air inside Diamonds and Dreams hung heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and something else. Something acrid, the unspoken judgment of Anya's simple cotton dress against the silk and velvet surrounding her. Each step on the plush carpet felt like a betrayal, her worn flats a stark contrast to the glittering displays. She'd saved for months for this necklace, a delicate silver chain holding a single, perfect opal. It was for her anniversary. Anya ran a nervous hand over the worn fabric of her dress, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. "Can I help you, dear?" A blonde woman with sharp eyes and a tighter smile asked, her voice dripping with unconcealed disdain. Anya swallowed, the lump in her throat making it difficult to speak. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm interested in this necklace." She pointed a trembling finger at the opal, trying to ignore the subtle glances exchanged between the saleswomen. "Oh, that one." The blonde's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Quite unremarkable, isn't it? We have far more exquisite pieces suitable for someone of refined taste." The other saleswoman chuckled, a sound like brittle ice. Anya's breath hitched. The sting of their words pierced her already fragile self-esteem. The familiar knot of insecurity tightened in her chest, a chilling echo of past humiliations. Tears pricked her eyes, blurring the already dazzling display of jewels. She clutched her small handbag tighter, her knuckles white. The weight of their judgment felt crushing. The opulent setting, once a symbol of her aspirations, now mocked her inadequacies. The whispers followed her like shadows. Anya felt their weight, sharp and cold, pressing down on her already fragile composure. The scent of lilies, usually so comforting, now felt suffocating, a cloying sweetness against the bitterness in her throat. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, a stark contrast to the icy stares directed her way. "It's quite simple, isn't it?" one saleswoman said, her voice laced with a condescending amusement that sliced through Anya. The words were a poisoned dart, hitting a nerve exposed by years of self-doubt. Anya's hands trembled as she clutched the velvet box containing the opal necklace. Her carefully chosen anniversary gift now felt pathetic, a reflection of her perceived inadequacy. I like its simplicity," she stammered, her voice cracking. The saleswomen exchanged a knowing glance, their laughter a tiny, cruel sound in the opulent silence of the store. The glittering chandeliers seemed to mock her, their light emphasizing the stark contrast between her simple dress and the luxurious surroundings. The pressure mounted, the air thickening with unspoken judgment. Each subtle sneer, each dismissive glance, chipped away at Anya's carefully constructed facade. She felt a familiar wave of nausea rising in her chest, the panic a cold fist clenching her heart. This wasn't just about the necklace. It was a resurgence of old insecurities, a painful echo of past criticisms that had shaped her self-perception. The tears welled in her eyes, blurring the opulent display before her. The opulent store, once a dream, now felt like a gilded cage, trapping her in a suffocating web of humiliation. She felt small, insignificant, swallowed whole by her own anxieties. I'll just go," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the faint clinking of expensive jewelry. She turned, fleeing the suffocating atmosphere, the weight of their judgment a heavy cloak settling upon her shoulders. The opal necklace, the symbol of her love and affection, felt like a cruel mockery of her vulnerability. The automatic doors hissed shut behind her, the sound of final, cruel punctuation marked to her humiliation. Anya stumbled onto the sidewalk, the cool evening air a stark contrast to the stifling opulence she'd just left. The city lights blurred through her tears, each glittering point a mocking reminder of her perceived inadequacy. Her breath hitched in ragged gasps, each inhalation a painful reminder of the sting in her throat. The weight of their judgment pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. She felt utterly exposed, her carefully constructed self-image shattered into a million tiny pieces. Reaching for her phone, her fingers trembled. She dialed David's number, the familiar ringtone a fragile lifeline in the swirling vortex of her despair. "David," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I need you." Even saying the words felt like admitting defeat, a confession of her vulnerability. She couldn't articulate the specifics, the sting of their words too raw, too humiliating. All she could manage was a broken sob, a desperate plea for comfort. The silence on the other end stretched, an eternity of waiting before his voice, warm and reassuring, cut through the darkness. "Anya, what's wrong? Where are you?" His concern was palpable, a soothing balm against the burning shame. She heard the urgency in his voice, the undercurrent of love that always managed to pierce through her self-doubt. She managed to give him her location, her voice barely a whisper. Each word was a battle against the rising tide of tears, each syllable a testament to her breaking composure. The sound of his car pulling up brought a flicker of hope, a small spark in the encroaching darkness. His presence, she knew, was the only thing that could possibly soothe the raw wounds inflicted by those cruel, careless judgments. The cool night air felt heavier now, a physical manifestation of the emotional weight she carried, until she saw the familiar headlights of his car cutting through the twilight gloom. The plush carpet felt strangely cold beneath Anya's bare feet. She stood on the sidewalk, the glittering facade of Etoile Jewelers, a cruel mockery of her inner turmoil. The scent of expensive perfume, still clinging to her clothes, was now nauseating. Each breath felt shallow, caught in the vice of her humiliation. Her reflection in a darkened shop window showed a woman she barely recognized, eyes red-rimmed, lips trembling, a stark contrast to the confident woman she tried to project inside. The whispers, the snickers, the dismissive glances, they played on a loop in her mind. She replayed their words, each syllable a tiny poisoned dart. Can she even afford this? Look at her shoes. Probably just window shopping. The sting was fresh, raw. It wasn't just about the necklace. It was about years of feeling inadequate, of battling a deep-seated insecurity she thought she'd overcome. Her phone vibrated against her palm, the warmth a small comfort. David's voice, a soothing counterpoint to the cacophony in her head, was already a lifeline. "Anya, what's wrong? Where are you?" His voice held a frantic edge that mirrored her own anxiety. I'm outside Etoile," she managed, her voice choked. The words caught in her throat, a lump of shame and self-reproach. She couldn't bring herself to explain the details, the precise cruelty of their treatment. The humiliation was too profound, too personal. "I'll be there in 5 minutes," David said, his tone firm and reassuring. "Just stay put." The city lights blurred through her tears, the cool night air doing little to soothe the burning shame. She leaned against the cool glass of the jewelry store, the opulent interior a stark reminder of her perceived inadequacy. The weight of their judgments pressed down on her, suffocating. She felt exposed, vulnerable, the carefully constructed facade of confidence crumbling around her. She was just Anya, a woman overwhelmed by a wave of emotions she hadn't felt in years, the familiar sting of inadequacy and the suffocating weight of past disappointments. The sound of a car approaching broke through her thoughts. Headlights pierced the darkness, cutting through the gloom. David's presence, she knew, was the only anchor in this storm of self-doubt. His arrival was a promise, a beacon in the swirling darkness of her despair, a promise of safety, understanding, and the comfort only his love could provide. David's car pulled up, the headlights briefly blinding before settling into a soft glow. He rushed out, his face etched with concern. "Anya, baby, what happened?" His voice was a balm, instantly soothing the raw edges of her humiliation. The scent of his cologne, a familiar comfort, mingled with the lingering perfume of the store, creating a jarring contrast. She leaned against him, the weight of her misery pressing down on her. The sobs finally came, racking her body with silent grief. He held her close, his warmth a tangible comfort against the chill of the night. They laughed at me, she choked out, the words tumbling out in a rush. Said I couldn't afford it, that I was just window shopping. He stroked her hair, his touch gentle, reassuring. Who dared to say that to you? His voice was low, dangerous, a simmering anger bubbling beneath the surface. She couldn't bring herself to describe the details, the precise cruelty of their smirks, the condescending tone of their voices. The shame was too profound. She just repeated, they laughed. They looked at me like I was nothing. The opulent interior of Itoil Jewelers loomed behind them, its glittering display a cruel reminder of her vulnerability. Each polished surface seemed to reflect her despair, magnifying her humiliation. The city lights, usually a source of wonder, now felt cold and distant. It's okay, David murmured, his voice tight with unshed fury. It's okay. I'm here now. He pulled her away from the store, his hand firm and protective. The walk to the car felt like traversing a vast distance, each step a painful reminder of her emotional turmoil. The cold night air did little to numb the sting of their words. As they drove away, the lights of the city blurred into streaks of color, mirroring the chaotic emotions swirling within her. The silence in the car was heavy with unspoken anger and hurt, a silent promise of retribution hanging between them. The car ride was a blur of unshed tears and simmering rage. Anya's knuckles were white, gripping the leather seat. The city lights, usually a source of fascination, were smeared into indistinct streaks of color, mirroring the turmoil within her. David's hand rested on her thigh, a silent promise of comfort, but the silence in the car was thick, heavy with unspoken emotions. They didn't even ask if I could afford it, she finally whispered, her voice cracking. They just assumed. The memory of their sneering faces, the condescending lilt in their voices, replayed in her mind with agonizing clarity. The scent of expensive perfume, still clinging to her clothes, now felt like a suffocating shroud. I know, baby, David said, his voice low and controlled. He squeezed her thigh gently. I know. He didn't need details. He felt her pain as keenly as if it were his own. The anger that simmered beneath his calm exterior was palpable. His jaw was tight, his knuckles slightly white as he gripped the steering wheel. They pulled into the driveway of their modern, minimalist home. The stark contrast between the cold sleekness of the architecture and the warmth of the interior, designed by Anya herself, was jarring. She needed comfort, but the pristine perfection felt alien, a mocking reflection of her shattered composure. Inside, the soft glow of recessed lighting barely penetrated the darkness clinging to Anya. She sank onto the plush sofa, the luxurious texture offering little solace. David knelt beside her, his gaze tender, his touch reassuring. He didn't speak, just held her close, his presence a tangible shield against the storm raging within her. I feel so stupid, she mumbled, her voice muffled against his chest. Like I don't belong there, like I'm invisible. The tears finally spilled over, hot and uncontrollable. This wasn't just about the necklace. It was about years of ingrained insecurity, of feeling perpetually out of place, of doubting her worth. David held her tighter, his silent strength a lifeline. He knew the roots of her insecurity ran deeper than a single humiliating encounter. He'd seen the subtle ways it manifested, the hesitation before entering a room, the apologetic tone in her voice, the self-deprecating humor that masked a profound sense of inadequacy. Tonight, he saw it laid bare, raw and painful. And in that moment, a silent promise solidified within him. This would be the end of it. He would make sure of it. The night was far from over. The plush sofa felt unexpectedly cold against Anya's bare arms. The scent of lavender from the diffusers, usually soothing, now felt cloying, a stark contrast to the sharp, almost metallic tang of her own unshed tears. David's touch, usually a source of comfort, felt strangely inadequate against the crushing weight of her humiliation. They looked right through me, she whispered, her voice trembling. The polished surfaces of their modern home mocked her inner turmoil, Every carefully chosen detail, a testament to their success, now felt like a cruel reminder of her perceived inadequacy. David, his normally vibrant eyes shadowed with concern, gently cupped her face. "They didn't see you, Anya. They saw what they wanted to see." His thumb brushed away a stray tear. "But I see you." His voice was low, laced with a quiet intensity that resonated deeper than any grand pronouncements ever could. "It's not just about the necklace, David," she confessed, her voice cracking. It's everything." The memories flooded back. Whispered comments in school hallways, patronizing smiles from colleagues. The subtle but persistent feeling of being an outsider, always on the periphery. This wasn't a single incident. It was the culmination of a lifetime of battling insecurity. He held her gaze, his eyes reflecting the depth of his understanding. "I know," he murmured, his fingers tracing the delicate line of her jaw. He knew the weight of her past, the struggles she'd silently endured. He knew the quiet strength she possessed, often hidden beneath a veneer of polite deference. "And I won't let them get away with it." A cold edge crept into his voice, a promise whispered on the quiet breath of righteous anger. The comfortable silence that usually filled their evenings was replaced by a shared intensity, a quiet war brewing beneath the surface. The unspoken pact between them was forged in the crucible of her pain, the shared understanding that this was not just a personal affront, but a battle they would face together. The night held the promise of a reckoning, a turning point in their lives. The car ride was silent, the city lights blurring into streaks of color outside the window. Anya's silence was heavy, a tangible thing pressing against David. He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, but her usual warmth was absent, replaced by a chilling stillness. He could feel the tremor in her hand, a subtle vibration that spoke volumes. The expensive leather of the car seat felt like sandpaper against her skin. "Anya," he began softly, his voice barely a whisper above the hum of the engine. "Tell me everything." She swallowed, the lump in her throat making it difficult to speak. They laughed," she finally managed, her voice cracking. "They said I couldn't afford it, that I was out of place." The unshed tears pricked at her eyes, blurring the already indistinct cityscape. The scent of the air freshener in the car, a sharp, citrusy scent, felt nauseatingly artificial against the bitter taste of humiliation coating her tongue. He pulled over to the side of the road, switching off the engine. The sudden silence amplified the throbbing ache in Anya's chest. The world seemed to shrink, constricting her with its suffocating silence. David turned to her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Who?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "The saleswomen," she whispered, her gaze fixed on her trembling hands. "They were cruel. They made me feel worthless." The memory of their condescending smiles, the sharp edge of their words, felt like a physical blow. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the image, but the pain was too vivid. David's jaw tightened. A familiar rage, usually kept tightly leashed, began to simmer beneath the surface. "I'll go there now," he said, his voice hardening with each word. The quiet fury radiating off him was almost palpable. "I'll make them regret this." He started to reach for his phone, his fingers already finding the contact for the store manager. The anger in him was fierce, a protective instinct ignited by her pain. But underneath the anger, a deep, protective love shone through, a love that promised justice, not just vengeance. The city lights outside cast long shadows on his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw. He was ready to fight for her, ready to protect her from the world's cruelty. This was more than just a shopping trip gone wrong. It was a battle for her dignity, a war he was ready to wage. The car, a sleek black sedan, hummed a low, almost imperceptible thrum. Anya stared out the window, the city lights a dizzying blur. Each passing street lamp cast a fleeting, harsh glow on her face, highlighting the sheen of unshed tears clinging to her lashes. The scent of David's cologne, a familiar blend of sandalwood and something subtly spicy, did little to comfort her. It only served as a stark contrast to the lingering, bitter taste of humiliation in her mouth. They looked at me, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the engine's purr. Her hands trembled, twisting the delicate silver band on her ring finger. The cool metal offered no solace. David, his jaw clenched, kept his eyes fixed on the road. The city's nocturnal pulse, the rhythmic blare of a distant siren, the hushed murmur of traffic, seemed to mock her quiet despair. He reached for her hand, his touch firm and reassuring. Anya flinched, not from his touch, but from the residual sting of their contempt. They made me feel invisible, she continued, her voice cracking. Like I wasn't even there, like I didn't deserve to be there. The words tumbled out, each one laden with the weight of years of suppressed insecurity. She squeezed his hand, her knuckles white. He pulled over, the sudden stillness of the engine's silence amplifying the throbbing in Anya's temples. The air, thick with the scent of exhaust fumes and damp concrete, felt heavy and suffocating. He turned to her, his face etched with a mixture of anger and protectiveness. The headlights of a passing car illuminated his eyes, briefly revealing the depth of his concern. "Tell me their names," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The quiet menace in his tone was as sharp and chilling as the night air. The unspoken threat hung heavy between them, a promise of retribution that resonated deeper than mere anger. Anya's tears finally spilled over, hot and silent, tracing paths down her cheeks. He gently brushed them away, his thumb caressing her skin. "It doesn't matter," she choked out, her voice thick with sobs. It's not about them. It's about me." The admission hung in the air, a fragile confession of vulnerability. The realization of her own self-doubt hit her with a fresh wave of pain, more potent than the initial humiliation. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with unspoken emotions, a silent promise of a reckoning to come. The car's interior, usually a sanctuary of quiet elegance, felt constricting. Anya's breath hitched in ragged gasps, the scent of expensive leather suddenly cloying. David's hand, large and warm, covered hers, but the comfort felt distant, a fragile shield against the onslaught of shame. "It's not about them," she repeated, her voice a threadbare whisper, each word a painful extraction. "It's about me." The city lights blurred through her tears, transforming the familiar cityscape into a distorted, melancholic painting. The rhythmic pulse of the wipers against the windshield mimicked the frantic beat of her heart. She felt exposed, raw, the carefully constructed walls of her composure crumbling around her. Years of ingrained insecurity, a legacy of a childhood spent navigating a world that often felt hostile, surged to the surface, overwhelming her. David remained silent, his grip tightening on her hand, a silent promise of unwavering support. He understood instinctively the depth of her pain. It wasn't just the blatant disregard of the sales associates. It was the confirmation of a deep-seated fear, a fear that had haunted her for years, whispering insidious doubts about her worthiness, her place in the world. I felt so small," she confessed, her voice choked with emotion. The cool night air did little to soothe the burning humiliation that still clung to her skin. "Like I was nothing, like I didn't belong." A single tear escaped, tracing a lonely path down her cheek. David's thumb gently wiped away the tear. The simple gesture held a profound tenderness, a silent acknowledgement of her pain. He knew the battle scars she carried, the invisible wounds that festered beneath her carefully cultivated composure. He had seen glimpses of her vulnerability before, but tonight, the mask had fallen, revealing the depth of her insecurity. He pulled the car to the side of the road, the sudden stillness a stark contrast to the throbbing chaos within Anya. The silence that followed was filled only with the soft, rhythmic breathing of the city and the quiet sob escaping Anya's lips. This wasn't just about a necklace. It was about a lifetime of self-doubt finally breaking free. The journey home was far from over, but in this moment, surrounded by the silent city, a fragile seed of hope took root. The reckoning he knew would come. But first, there was healing to be done. The car hummed, a low thrum against the rising tide of Anya's despair. David reached across the console, his fingers brushing hers. The simple touch, usually a comfort, felt inadequate tonight. Rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the city lights into shimmering streaks. The scent of petrichor mingled with the lingering sweetness of the expensive perfume she'd sampled in the store, a cruel reminder of her humiliation. I just wanted it," she whispered, her voice cracking. The words felt inadequate, insufficient to capture the weight of her emotions. She'd wanted the necklace, yes, but more than that, she'd craved the validation, the unspoken affirmation that she belonged in that opulent world. David squeezed her hand, his gaze unwavering. "I know, sweetheart. I know." He didn't pry, didn't press for details. He knew the silence between them was heavy with unspoken words, laden with the sting of past hurts resurrected by the day's events. Anya swallowed, the lump in her throat making it difficult to speak. The opulent store, with its gleaming counters and condescending staff, felt miles away, yet the memory lingered, a sharp, persistent pain. She pictured their faces, their smirks, the way their eyes had lingered on her simple clothes, their dismissive tones slicing through her already fragile self-esteem. "It wasn't just the necklace, David," she finally managed, her voice barely a breath. "It was everything. All the times I felt invisible." Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the already indistinct view through the rain-streaked window. The city lights, usually a captivating spectacle, now felt like mocking spotlights illuminating her shame. He pulled the car over, the sudden stillness amplifying the turmoil within her. He switched off the engine, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain. He turned to her, his expression a mixture of concern and understanding. "Tell me, Anya. Tell me everything." His voice was soft, a gentle balm to her raw emotions. His hand found hers again, his touch conveying a depth of love and support that momentarily eased the crushing weight of her despair. The rain continued to fall, a somber soundtrack to her confession, a cleansing torrent mirroring the emotional storm raging within. The car's interior, usually a haven of comfort, felt suffocating. Anya's breath hitched, each inhale a ragged gasp against the tightening knot in her chest. The rain, a relentless drumming against the roof, mirrored the frantic beat of her heart. David's hand, warm and reassuring in hers, offered little solace. The scent of his cologne, usually a source of comfort, now felt oddly distant, a stark contrast to the bitter taste of humiliation clinging to her tongue. "It wasn't just the necklace," she repeated, her voice barely audible above the storm. Tears streamed down her face, hot and uncontrolled. She swiped at them with the back of her hand, leaving smudged tracks across her cheeks. The feeling of the rough fabric against her skin was another unwelcome sensation, adding to the growing sense of disarray. They looked at me," she whispered, her voice catching, like I didn't belong there, like I was some kind of imposter." She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the memory of their sneering faces, the dismissive flick of their wrists, the opulent setting, the gleaming jewelry, all seemed to mock her, highlighting her perceived inadequacy. David remained silent, his gaze unwavering, his hand tightening around hers. He understood the depth of her pain, the years of ingrained insecurity bubbling to the surface. He knew this wasn't just about a necklace. It was about a lifetime of feeling invisible, of constantly questioning her worth. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken emotions, punctuated only by the relentless rhythm of the rain. I felt so small," she confessed, her voice trembling, "like I was back in that tiny apartment, scraping by, wondering if I'd ever be good enough." The memory, sharp and painful, pierced through her present despair. The past felt overwhelmingly present, a suffocating weight she'd been carrying for far too long. David pulled her closer, his embrace a silent promise of protection, of unwavering support. "It's okay, Anya," he murmured, his voice a gentle caress against her ear. "You are enough." More than enough. His words were a balm to her wounded soul, a reassurance she desperately needed. But even as she felt the comfort of his arms around her, a new thought surfaced, a flicker of defiance in the midst of her despair. The shame began to morph, subtly shifting from self-directed towards those who had inflicted it. A quiet simmer of anger began to brew beneath the surface of her tears. The rain continued to fall, washing away the immediate pain, but leaving behind a residue of righteous indignation. The drive home continued, a journey not just through the rain-swept city, but through a deeper, more complex emotional landscape. The car ride was a blur of city lights streaking past, each one a tiny, mocking reminder of the glittering opulence she'd just left behind. Anya's reflection in the rain-slicked window showed a woman ravaged by unspoken tears. Her eyes, usually sparkling with intelligence and warmth, were now dull with a profound sense of shame. The silence between her and David felt monumental, a chasm carved by the sting of humiliation. The scent of expensive leather and polished wood in the car, usually a comfort, only amplified the stark contrast to her own simple dress, now feeling cheap and inadequate. "It's not just the necklace, David," she whispered, her voice catching. The words, though barely audible, carried the weight of a lifetime of insecurity. She rubbed her fingers across her trembling lips, the action a small, desperate attempt to regain control. David reached out, his hand covering hers. His touch was warm, grounding, but the unspoken worry etched on his face mirrored her own turmoil. He knew this wasn't just about a pricey necklace. It was about something far deeper, something far more painful. "I felt invisible," Anya continued, her voice cracking, "like they didn't even see me, like I was nothing." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years of battling self-doubt, the echoes of a childhood spent feeling overlooked and unimportant. The memory of their condescending smiles, the barely concealed amusement in their eyes, clawed at her, a fresh wound reopening with each passing moment. David squeezed her hand, offering silent reassurance. He knew the sting of feeling undervalued, of being judged solely on appearances. He knew the battles she'd fought to build her self-esteem, the quiet victories she'd celebrated along the way. But this was different. This was a visceral attack on her very sense of self. "They made me feel like I didn't deserve to be there," she added, her voice barely a breath. The rain intensified, its rhythm mirroring the frantic beat of her heart. Each drop felt like a tiny hammer blow, each gust of wind a cruel reminder of her vulnerability. David pulled into their driveway, the familiar comfort of their home offering little solace. He turned to her, his gaze filled with a protective intensity that warmed her even as the cold rain continued to lash against the car. "We'll handle this, Anya," he promised, his voice low and steady. Together, the unspoken promise hung between them, a silent pledge of support against the storm raging both inside and outside the car. The key to their home felt strangely heavy in his hand, the weight of the evening's events settling upon him as he unlocked the door, ready to face the next phase of this ordeal. The car, a sanctuary moments ago, now felt like a suffocating cage. The scent of leather, once luxurious, was now cloying, a stark contrast to the raw ache in Anya's chest. Rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the city lights into shimmering streaks, mirroring the chaotic swirl of emotions inside her. David's hand, warm and reassuring over hers, offered little comfort. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain. "I felt invisible," Anya finally whispered, her voice trembling. The word hung in the air, fragile and exposed. She squeezed her eyes shut, battling the rising tide of tears. The memory of those condescending smiles, the subtle mockery in their eyes, played on a cruel loop in her mind. David's jaw tightened. He knew the battles Anya had fought to build her self-esteem, the quiet victories she'd celebrated. But this was different. This wasn't a minor setback. It was a brutal assault on her spirit. He felt a familiar surge of protective anger, a fire ignited by the injustice of it all. "They didn't see me, David," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. They didn't see anything but what they wanted to see. A single tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. A solitary tear in a storm of unspoken emotions. She felt utterly exposed, vulnerable, stripped bare of her usual confidence. He pulled into their driveway, the familiar sight of their home offering little solace. The rain continued its relentless assault, mirroring the turmoil within her. He turned to her, his gaze filled with a profound sadness and a fierce protectiveness. "It wasn't you, Anya," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It was them, their short-sightedness, their prejudice. It's their problem, not yours." Anya managed a weak smile, a fragile blossom pushing through the frozen ground of her despair. "But it hurts, David. It hurts so much." The words were laden with the weight of years of insecurity, of battling a lifetime of feeling inadequate. The weight of their judgment, their casual cruelty, pressed down on her like a physical burden. He reached for her, pulling her into a warm embrace. The scent of his cologne, usually a source of comfort, was momentarily overshadowed by the lingering scent of expensive perfume and the sharp tang of her own unshed tears. He held her tight, offering a silent promise of strength and unwavering support. "We'll face this together," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Together, we'll fix this." The promise hung between them, a beacon in the darkness, a testament to their unwavering love. The key felt heavy in his hand, not just from the weight of the metal, but the weight of the evening's events. He opened the door, ready to face whatever came next, together. The car ride was a blur of unshed tears and choked sobs. Anya's reflection in the rain-streaked window showed a woman ravaged, her carefully constructed composure shattered. The opulent interior of their car, usually a symbol of their comfortable life, felt alien and cold. David reached for her hand, his touch tentative, unsure. The silence between them was heavy, laden with the unspoken weight of her humiliation. "They looked right through me," Anya finally said, her voice a fragile whisper barely audible above the drumming rain. The words tumbled out, each one carrying the sting of a fresh wound. She felt utterly exposed, stripped bare not just of her expensive clothes, but of her self-worth. David squeezed her hand, his grip firm but gentle. He knew this wasn't just about a necklace. It was about a lifetime of battling insecurities, a constant struggle against the insidious whispers of self-doubt. He had witnessed her triumphs, her quiet battles, her hard-won confidence. But seeing her so broken, so vulnerable, ignited a fierce protectiveness within him. "They're blind, Anya," he said, his voice low and steady, a counterpoint to the tempest raging within her. "Blind to everything but their own petty judgments. Don't let them steal your light." Anya managed a weak smile, a fragile attempt to push back the darkness threatening to consume her. "It's hard, David. It's so incredibly hard." The words were thick with unshed tears, each syllable a testament to the years spent fighting to feel worthy, to feel seen. He pulled into their driveway, the familiar sight of their home offering little comfort. The rain continued its relentless assault, a fitting metaphor for the emotional storm raging inside her. He switched off the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the ache in her chest. He turned to her, his gaze filled with a profound sorrow and an unwavering love. "Tell me everything," he said softly, his voice a gentle invitation. "Tell me everything that happened." He waited, offering not just words of comfort, but a sanctuary of unwavering support, a safe space for her to unravel without judgment. The weight of their shared journey, their unspoken bond, held them together, a lifeline in the tumultuous aftermath of her humiliation. The key to their home felt heavy in his hand, a symbol not just of their house, but of the challenges they would face together, side by side. The car, usually a haven of luxury, felt like a suffocating cage. Rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the city lights into shimmering streaks. Anya's breath hitched, a sob catching in her throat. The expensive silk of her dress, meant to project confidence, felt like a suffocating weight. David's hand, large and comforting, rested on hers. His silence was a balm, a silent acknowledgement of her pain. I felt like nothing, she whispered, her voice trembling. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. The memory of the sales associates' sneering faces, their dismissive laughter, felt like a physical blow. She could still hear the clipped tones, the condescending smiles. David squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with a heartbreaking tenderness. They didn't see you, Anya. They saw what they wanted to see. A woman they felt was beneath them. His voice was low, reassuring, a steady anchor in the storm of her emotions. She shook her head, tears blurring her vision. It wasn't just the necklace, David. It was everything. All those years, feeling like I wasn't good enough, not smart enough, not worthy. The confession hung between them, heavy with unspoken years of insecurity. The rain intensified, mirroring the turmoil within her. Each drop felt like a tiny accusation, a constant reminder of her perceived inadequacy. The city lights seemed to mock her, their brilliance highlighting the darkness within her. She buried her face in her hands, the rough silk offering little solace. "It's not true, Anya," David said softly, his voice firm. "You are worthy. You are brilliant, kind, and beautiful." They missed it all because they were too busy judging. His words were a lifeline, pulling her back from the edge of despair. She looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. The familiar comfort of his presence began to pierce the wall of her despair. A fragile hope, a tiny spark in the darkness, flickered to life within her. "But what if they were right?" she whispered, the question a painful echo of her deepest fears. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the weight of her self-doubt, before she reached for his hand again, squeezing it tight, finding solace in his unwavering support. The car pulled up to the curb outside the opulent jewelry store, its polished chrome gleaming under the streetlights. David switched off the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the tremor in Anya's hands. He turned to her, his expression a mixture of concern and anger. "Tell me again," he said, his voice low and steady, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Anya. She recounted the events, her voice catching on each humiliating detail. The condescending smiles, the whispered remarks, the blatant dismissal. It all poured out, a torrent of hurt and shame. The scent of expensive perfume, usually alluring, now felt nauseating, a constant reminder of the opulent setting that had become a stage for her humiliation. They didn't even believe I could afford it," she finished, her voice barely a whisper. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the already hazy city lights reflected in the car's window. The cool glass felt cold against her cheek. David's jaw tightened. "Those vultures," he muttered, his hand instinctively reaching for hers. His touch, usually a source of comfort, felt strangely inadequate in the face of her profound distress. He didn't understand the full depth of her pain yet, but the injustice of it burned in him. He knew Anya, her quiet strength, her unwavering kindness. These were things that deserved respect, not ridicule. "I'll go there now," he said, his voice firm, "and I'll make them regret this." The anger in his voice was a protective shield, a promise of retribution against her silent tormentors. The city lights cast long shadows, stretching and distorting their reality as they both faced the injustice that had been done. The store's polished marble floor felt cold beneath David's shoes as he strode purposefully towards the counter, Anya's words echoing in his ears. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken tension, hung heavy. He saw the same sales associates, their smiles now strained, their eyes darting nervously. A palpable shift in the atmosphere had occurred. The opulent setting, once a symbol of Anya's humiliation, now felt like a battlefield. "I need to speak to the manager." David's voice was low, controlled, yet laced with an undercurrent of simmering fury that sent shivers down their spines. The manager, a woman with a tightly controlled smile and a meticulously styled bob, emerged, her forced composure barely concealing her apprehension. "Sir, is there a problem?" she asked, her voice a carefully modulated tremor. My wife, David gestured towards the car, where Anya sat, her face buried in her hands, was treated appallingly, disrespected, mocked. He spoke with measured precision, each word a carefully aimed dart. The manager's carefully crafted facade began to crumble. The sales associates exchanged panicked glances. They had underestimated him, mistaking his quiet demeanor for weakness. David's quiet anger was far more terrifying. She wanted to purchase a necklace, David continued, his voice rising slightly. And your staff subjected her to a barrage of insults and condescension. They questioned her ability to afford it. They judged her. His gaze swept across the faces of the sales staff, each one now a picture of dawning horror. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the soft hum of the air conditioning. The opulent display of jewelry seemed to mock their fear. The manager stammered, attempting a weak apology, but David cut her short. Apologies aren't enough, he stated, his eyes blazing. My wife isn't just my wife. She's... He paused for dramatic effect, the weight of the revelation hanging heavy in the air. He looked at the sales associates, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and growing unease, a perfect mirror to his own rising triumph. She's the majority shareholder of this entire chain. The manager's carefully constructed composure shattered. Her perfectly applied lipstick trembled. David's quiet fury was a palpable force, radiating outwards, chilling the air already thick with the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken dread. The sales associates shifted uncomfortably, their practiced smiles wiped clean by a wave of stark terror. The glint of diamonds in the display cases seemed to mock their predicament. She's... David hesitated, the unspoken words hanging heavy between them, a silent crescendo building to a thunderous climax. He looked at Anya, her face still hidden, the silence between them a stark contrast to the rising panic in the store. He saw the tremor in her hand, clutching her purse. He felt a surge of protective anger. My wife, he finally said, his voice low and controlled, inherited a significant stake in this company, a substantial one. He watched their faces, the dawning horror mirroring their earlier casual cruelty. Their eyes widened, their breaths hitched. The opulent surroundings, once a symbol of their perceived superiority, suddenly felt claustrophobic. One of the sales associates, a young woman with bleached blonde hair and a meticulously applied tan, visibly paled. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing the raw fear beneath. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. The manager, regaining a sliver of control, stammered, Mr. Harrison, I assure you we will investigate this matter. Her voice was thin, reedy, betraying her desperate attempt at maintaining control. David's gaze remained unwavering. Investigate? He repeated, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. I think a full and thorough understanding of your staff's behavior is already quite clear. And I suspect, he paused, his eyes glinting with controlled power, that my wife's position within the company might shed some unexpected light on the situation. He allowed the implication to hang in the air, heavy with unspoken consequences. The weight of the truth pressed down on them, crushing their carefully built illusions of superiority. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by Anya's quiet sobs, the sound echoing the silent screams of their shattered arrogance. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. Anya, still trembling, clutched David's hand, her knuckles bone-white. The scent of expensive perfume, usually alluring, now felt suffocating, a stark reminder of the humiliation she'd endured. David's hand, strong and warm, offered a fragile anchor in the storm of her emotions. He squeezed it gently, offering silent reassurance. They mocked me, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the muted gasps of the horrified sales staff. Tears streamed down her face, hot and stinging. The diamonds in the display cases seemed to glitter with a cruel mockery, reflecting the tears she couldn't control. David's gaze swept across the faces of the staff, their expressions ranging from stunned disbelief to abject terror. He felt a surge of protective fury, a white-hot anger that burned away the initial shock. "They didn't just mock you, Anya," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "They insulted my wife." The manager, a woman whose carefully constructed facade was crumbling before his eyes, attempted to intervene. "Mr. Harrison, please, let's discuss this privately. This is a misunderstanding." David cut her off with a curt gesture. "A misunderstanding? They questioned your ability to afford a necklace, Anya. They sneered at your clothes, your everything. And you, for God's sake, are not just my wife." He paused, drawing out the moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. The silence in the store was deafening, punctuated only by Anya's quiet sobs and the frantic thumping of his own heart. "You're far more than they can comprehend." He looked at Anya, a silent promise passing between them. He knew now the full extent of her grandmother's inheritance, the scale of it. This wasn't just about a necklace. This was about a blatant disregard for human dignity, fueled by prejudice and blinded by a crass assessment of wealth. He knew, with chilling certainty, the storm about to break. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, broken only by Anya's ragged breaths. The air, thick with the scent of expensive leather and sandalwood, felt suddenly cloying. David's gaze, usually warm and comforting, was now a storm of righteous anger. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white as he gripped Anya's hand. The horrified expressions of the sales staff, a mixture of fear and disbelief, were almost comical in their stark contrast to the gravity of the situation. One of the younger saleswomen, her carefully applied makeup now smeared, began to whimper, a thin, reedy sound lost in the oppressive silence. Another, older woman, her face a mask of carefully controlled panic, tried to step forward, but David's gaze stopped her cold. It was a gaze that spoke of power, of a simmering rage held just barely in check. "You think you can judge a book by its cover?" he finally said, his voice low and controlled, each word carrying the weight of simmering fury. His eyes, usually filled with laughter, were hard and unforgiving. He released Anya's hand just enough to gesture towards the trembling saleswoman. "You looked at my wife, saw what you thought was a simple woman, and treated her accordingly." Anya, despite the pain and humiliation, felt a surge of unexpected warmth bloom in her chest. His anger wasn't just for her. It was a defense, a shield against their cruelty. It was a powerful testament to their love. "It's not about the necklace, is it?" David continued, his voice rising slightly. "It's about the ingrained prejudice that allowed you to treat her with such contempt. It's about the casual cruelty, the assumption of inferiority." He paused, letting his words hang heavy in the air. The silence that followed was even more profound than before, pregnant with unspoken accusations and mounting fear. The opulent setting of the jewelry store, once a source of intimidation, now felt like a cage, trapping the sales staff in the consequences of their actions. The glitter of the diamonds seemed to mock their terror. The silence hung heavy, a tangible thing pressing down on them. The scent of expensive perfume, usually a subtle luxury, now felt suffocating, a cruel reminder of the humiliation Anya had endured. David's anger, a simmering volcano threatening to erupt, radiated outwards, silencing the nervous whispers of the sales staff. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over the trembling younger woman. Her eyes, wide and filled with a terror that bordered on panic, darted around the room, seeking escape in the polished surfaces and gleaming displays. "You think you know someone by looking at them?" David's voice, though controlled, carried a chilling undercurrent of fury. His words, sharp and precise, cut through the thick atmosphere like shards of ice. He gestured to the necklace, still lying untouched on the velvet counter, its glittering diamonds reflecting the fear in the saleswoman's eyes. "This necklace, it's nothing compared to the damage you've done." Anya watched, her heart a tangled mess of emotions. The warmth of David's protective anger battled with the lingering sting of humiliation. She saw a flicker of understanding, a dawning recognition of their mistake, in the eyes of the older saleswoman. But it was quickly replaced by a renewed wave of fear as David's gaze swept across the group, leaving no one untouched by its icy intensity. "My wife," David continued, his voice dropping to a low growl, "isn't just my wife." He paused, drawing out the suspense, letting the weight of his words settle upon them. The air crackled with unspoken truths, with the anticipation of a revelation that would shatter their carefully constructed world. The shimmering displays of jewels seemed to dim, as if the very light in the room was being sucked away by the escalating tension. The polished mahogany of the counters seemed to absorb the sound, leaving only the heavy silence punctuated by the erratic thump of Anya's heart. The fear in the room was palpable, thick and suffocating, a silent scream trapped beneath the surface of forced composure. The older saleswoman, her face ashen, stammered, Mr. we didn't." Her voice trailed off, choked by fear. The younger woman, eyes wide with terror, remained silent, her lips trembling. The air hung thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the metallic tang of fear. David's gaze, cold and unwavering, swept over them. The opulent setting, usually a source of pride, now felt oppressive, a gilded cage trapping them in their mistake. "Didn't what?" David's voice, low and dangerous, vibrated with barely controlled rage. He moved closer, his presence a tangible threat. The faint clinking of a diamond necklace, disturbed by his movement, sliced through the silence. Anya watched, a strange calm settling over her amidst the maelstrom of emotions. The humiliation, though still raw, began to recede, replaced by a dawning sense of something else. Anticipation? The younger saleswoman finally found her voice, a thin, reedy sound. We thought." She glanced at her colleague, seeking support, finding only shared panic. "We thought she couldn't afford it." David's eyes narrowed. "And what gave you that impression?" His voice was ice, each word a carefully placed shard. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the erratic thump of Anya's heart. She saw, in the reflection of a nearby crystal vase, her own face pale but strangely composed. A faint smile touched her lips. The tables had turned. The older saleswoman, desperate, attempted damage control. "Sir, we apologize. It was a misunderstanding. A terrible mistake." Her voice cracked, betraying the fear that clawed at her composure. David remained silent, his gaze piercing, unwavering. He was enjoying this, Anya realized, relishing the shift in power. The tension stretched, taut and fragile, a single thread holding the scene together. David's silence was more menacing than any outburst. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a silent countdown to the truth. The scent of lilies, usually delicate and sweet, now felt heavy and cloying, a suffocating blanket over the scene. The weight of their mistake pressed down on the saleswomen, their fear palpable. Anya knew with a strange certainty that the moment of revelation was near. The truth, a sharp blade, was about to be unsheathed. The silence stretched, a taut membrane threatening to burst. The air, thick with unspoken accusations, vibrated with the unspoken truth hanging between them. The scent of lilies, usually delicate and sweet, now felt cloying, suffocating. David's silence was a weapon, more potent than any shout. Anya, watching the fear drain the color from the saleswomen's faces, felt a strange mixture of triumph and unease. The humiliation of moments ago was fading, replaced by a cold, potent satisfaction. "Perhaps," David finally said, his voice low and controlled, a dangerous calm settling over him, "you should explain yourselves, in detail." His gaze, sharp and unwavering, moved from one to the other, each woman shrinking under its intensity. The opulent setting, normally a source of pride, felt oppressive, a gilded cage reflecting their terror. The younger saleswoman, her voice a barely audible whisper, stammered, We just assumed." She glanced at her older colleague, seeking solace in shared guilt, finding only mirrored panic. Her eyes, wide and terrified, darted around the store, seeking an escape. The older woman, her face a mask of regret, wrung her hands. "We apologize, sir. We made a terrible mistake. We judged her based on appearances." Her voice trembled, a pathetic attempt to mitigate the looming consequence. The weight of their actions pressed down upon them, heavy and suffocating. David's expression remained unchanged. His silence was a chilling prelude, the measured pacing of a predator. He subtly shifted his weight, the faint clinking of his watch a sharp counterpoint to the suffocating silence. The tension, taut and unbearable, was a physical thing, tangible in the air, a suffocating blanket woven from fear and regret. Anya, observing them, felt the slow, creeping satisfaction of justice unfolding. The power shift was palpable, a seismic change felt in the very fabric of the room. The tables had indeed turned. The silence stretched, thick and heavy like the scent of expensive perfume clinging to the plush carpet. David's gaze, cold and sharp as shattered glass, held each sales associate captive. The opulent surroundings, the gleaming mahogany, the soft lighting highlighting the flawless diamonds, now felt like a suffocating cage. Anya, however, felt a curious detachment, watching the unraveling with a detached fascination. The earlier humiliation still lingered, a dull ache beneath the burgeoning sense of power. We thought, the younger saleswoman stammered, her voice barely a whisper, lost in the vastness of the store. Her hands, clasped tightly in front of her, trembled like leaves in a storm. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision of David's unwavering stare. The older woman, her face a mask of frozen regret, stepped forward, a desperate attempt to intervene. "Sir, please, we apologize. We made a terrible judgment. We deeply regret our behavior." Her voice cracked, betraying the years of practiced composure. The carefully crafted facade of professional politeness had crumbled, revealing the raw fear beneath. David remained silent, his stillness more menacing than any outburst. He subtly shifted his weight, the faint clinking of his watch a rhythmic punctuation to the suffocating silence. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, the tension palpable enough to taste. Anya noticed the slight tremor in the manager's hand as he reached for the intercom, his carefully controlled composure fraying at the edges. He opened his mouth to speak, but David raised a hand, silencing him with a single gesture. The power in that gesture was undeniable, a silent assertion of dominance that left the manager speechless. Anya watched as the realization dawned on the manager's face, the color draining from his skin like water escaping a cracked vase. His carefully constructed world, built on assumptions and privilege, was crumbling around him. The weight of his employees' actions and his own complicity in their behavior pressed down upon him. David finally spoke, his voice low and measured, each word carrying the weight of suppressed fury. "My wife," he began, his gaze sweeping over the horrified faces before him, "is not just my wife. She is the majority shareholder of this entire company." The words hung in the air, each syllable a hammer blow shattering the illusion of their comfortable reality. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint ticking of David's watch, a relentless reminder of the ticking clock of their careers. The transformation was instantaneous. Fear replaced arrogance, humility replaced disdain. The opulent store, once a symbol of their success, now felt like a mausoleum of their mistakes. The silence hung heavy, thick with the unspoken. The scent of expensive perfume, usually a symbol of luxury, now felt cloying, suffocating. Anya felt a tremor run through her, not from fear, but from a strange, burgeoning power. David's controlled fury was a tangible thing, radiating outward from him in waves. The sales associates, their faces ashen, looked like deer caught in headlights. The younger woman whimpered softly, her shoulders shaking. We didn't know," she choked out, her voice trembling. The older woman, her carefully constructed composure shattered, wrung her hands, her eyes wide with a dawning terror. We truly apologize. The store manager, his face a mask of strained politeness, attempted to intervene, his hand hovering over the intercom. But David silenced him with a curt gesture. The air crackled with anticipation, the silence more deafening than any shout. The weight of their actions pressed down on them, the opulent setting suddenly feeling oppressive, claustrophobic. David's gaze, cold and calculating, swept over their faces, lingering on each one. He saw their fear, their regret, their desperate attempts to mitigate the damage. He saw their realization. He shifted his weight, the faintest clink of his watch a sharp counterpoint to the suffocating silence. This wasn't about the necklace anymore. This was about justice. He spoke, his voice low and measured, each word a carefully placed stone building a wall around them. "My wife," he began, his voice low, the words precise and deliberate, "is not just my wife." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He watched their expressions morph from fear to something akin to stunned disbelief. "She is the majority shareholder of this company." The final word hung in the air, a thunderclap in the sudden, terrifying silence. The opulent surroundings, once a symbol of their success, had become a stark reminder of their blatant disregard for another human being. The floor seemed to tilt beneath their feet, the carefully constructed illusion of their reality cracking and crumbling. The expensive jewelry, once objects of desire, now felt like cold, hard symbols of their folly. Anya, watching, felt the dull ache of humiliation begin to fade, replaced by a slow, simmering anger. And beneath that, a powerful, unexpected surge of strength. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating as the scent of expensive perfume. Anya, still trembling, felt David's hand, warm and reassuring, clasp hers. His gaze, however, remained locked on the three faces before him, the manager's carefully constructed composure crumbling, the younger saleswoman openly weeping, and the older woman's face a mask of horrified disbelief. The opulent surroundings, usually dazzling, felt suddenly oppressive, a gilded cage highlighting their humiliating mistake. You didn't know who she was?" David's voice, low and dangerous, cut through the silence. He hadn't raised his voice, but the controlled fury radiating from him was palpable. The manager stammered, "Sir, we had no idea. Her attire." He gestured vaguely at Anya, his voice trailing off. The implication hung heavy in the air, a subtle insult, even in the face of utter defeat. Anya's anger flared, a hot, fierce ember pushing aside the icy numbness. "My attire?" she repeated, her voice quiet but firm, each word a carefully placed stone. "Is that what this was about? My clothes?" The younger saleswoman sobbed, "No, ma'am, we were just jealous." Her confession, clumsy and unconvincing, only deepened the chasm of their mistake. David's grip tightened on Anya's hand. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of protectiveness and a newfound understanding. He leaned in slightly, whispering, "It's all right, my love. Let me handle this." Then, turning back to the terrified trio, he spoke again, his voice measured, each word precise and deliberate. "Let's just say," he paused, the silence stretching into a taut band, "my wife's grandmother had impeccable taste and a considerable portfolio, a portfolio that now makes her the majority shareholder of this establishment." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The opulent surroundings seemed to shrink, the weight of their actions pressing down with crushing force. The three employees stared, mouths agape, their carefully constructed realities crumbling around them. The expensive jewelry, once symbols of success, now felt like cold, hard reminders of their arrogance. The air crackled with the silent exchange of power. The shift was sudden, violent, and utterly transformative. Anya felt a complex brew of emotions: anger, humiliation, a growing sense of bewilderment. But at the heart of it all, a quiet, powerful surge of strength, like a dormant volcano finally erupting. The humiliation was fading, replaced by a slow, simmering heat that promised retribution. The manager, Mr. Fitzwilliam, a man whose carefully cultivated air of superiority had just been utterly demolished, stammered. Mr. Hayes, I assure you, this was a misunderstanding. A terrible, regrettable misunderstanding. His usually polished shoes seemed to shrink beneath the weight of his own failure. The opulent Persian rug beneath their feet felt suddenly coarse and uncomfortable under Anya's trembling feet. David, his protective arms still around Anya, didn't speak immediately. He allowed the silence, thick with the lingering scent of expensive perfume and the stark aroma of fear, to hang heavy in the air. The younger saleswoman, her face buried in her hands, sobbed uncontrollably. The older one, usually so sharp and condescending, stared blankly ahead, her carefully applied makeup smeared with tears. Anya, however, felt the anger begin to recede, replaced by a chilling numbness. The sting of their mockery remained, but a colder, harder emotion began to take its place. It was the dawning realization of the power she now held, a power she hadn't known she possessed. The realization settled in her bones, heavy and undeniable. David's voice, when it finally came, was quiet but deadly. A misunderstanding? You judged my wife based on her clothes, her demeanor, assuming she couldn't afford a necklace in this establishment. You assumed her worth based on superficial appearances. His gaze swept across their faces, each look a precise and cutting judgment. You assumed incorrectly. He paused, the silence growing more intense, charged with unspoken threats. My wife, Anya Hayes, he said, his voice dropping almost to a whisper, but the effect was amplified by the complete silence of the room, is not just my wife. She is the majority shareholder of this entire chain. Her grandmother, bless her soul, left her a rather substantial inheritance. The silence that followed was absolute. The weight of David's revelation hung in the air, a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. Mr. Fitzwilliam's face went ashen. The younger saleswoman's sobs intensified. The older woman simply stared, her eyes wide with a horrified disbelief that bordered on paralysis. The expensive jewelry around them seemed to mock their humiliation, glittering cruelly in the harsh fluorescent lights. The once opulent surroundings now felt like a tomb, heavy with the weight of their devastating mistake. Anya felt a shudder run through her. This wasn't just about the necklace anymore. This was about power, respect, and the crushing weight of prejudice. The air hung thick with the unspoken. Anya, still numb, felt the cool, polished marble of the counter against her trembling fingertips, the scent of expensive leather and exotic woods, moments before alluring, now felt suffocating. David's words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the hushed whispers of the staff. Their meticulously crafted composure had shattered, leaving behind a wreckage of fear and regret. Mr. Fitzwilliam, his face drained of color, looked like a man confronting his own mortality. His carefully constructed persona, built on years of subtly condescending interactions with customers, lay in ruins at his feet. The younger saleswoman's sobs were now a strangled, heart-wrenching sound. The older woman, her carefully applied makeup a grotesque mask of shock, stared blankly ahead, her eyes reflecting a stark terror. Anya finally broke the silence, her voice barely a whisper. I don't understand, she managed, the words catching in her throat. The emotion that finally broke through the numbness was not anger, but a deep, chilling hurt. It wasn't the humiliation that resonated as strongly as the stark, undeniable realization of the deep-seated prejudice they had shown her. It wasn't about the necklace anymore. It was about the casual cruelty masked as polite indifference. David squeezed her hand, his gaze unwavering as he met the eyes of the terrified staff. Understand what, my love? He murmured, his voice soft yet laced with a simmering intensity that spoke volumes. He looked at each of them, letting the weight of their actions settle upon them. The silence returned, heavier this time, charged with the raw energy of unspoken accusations and the palpable fear that radiated from the sales staff. The glittering jewels seemed to mock their pathetic display, reflecting their humiliation in a cruel, unforgiving light. The opulent setting, only moments ago a symbol of unattainable luxury, was now a stark reminder of their devastating error in judgment. The weight of their mistake, heavy and suffocating, permeated the room. The silence stretched, each second amplifying the weight of their collective guilt. Anya's breath hitched. The weight of their stares, heavy and suffocating, pressed down on her. The glittering display cases, moments ago symbols of unattainable desire, now mocked her with their cold, indifferent gleam. The scent of expensive perfume, once a subtle luxury, now felt cloying, sickening. David's hand, warm and reassuring in hers, was her only anchor in the swirling storm of emotions. I just wanted a necklace," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. Tears welled, blurring the already distorted vision of the staff's terrified faces. Mr. Fitzwilliam, his usually impeccable composure shattered, stammered, Mrs. Davies, we didn't know." David's grip tightened. His voice, low and controlled, resonated through the stunned silence. "Know what? Know that my wife, the woman you treated with such blatant contempt, is not just my wife. Know that you insulted the majority shareholder of this entire chain." The statement hung in the air, a thunderclap in the opulent silence. The younger saleswoman, her face pale and streaked with tears, whimpered. The older woman, her carefully constructed mask of professionalism crumbling, stared at Anya with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Their eyes darted nervously towards Mr. Fitzwilliam, seeking some form of guidance, some escape from the horrifying reality that was unfolding before them. His usually confident posture wilted. He looked smaller, diminished, the power he'd wielded so casually suddenly stripped away. Anya felt a flicker of something akin to triumph, a small spark of fire igniting in the icy landscape of her humiliation. But it was quickly overwhelmed by a wave of exhaustion. The anger, the hurt, the years of ingrained insecurity, it all threatened to consume her. She squeezed David's hand again, the silent communication passing between them a lifeline in the suffocating atmosphere. I don't want an apology," she finally said, her voice stronger now, laced with a quiet dignity that surprised even herself. "I want you to understand, to truly understand the damage your prejudice caused." The words hung in the air, a challenge, a promise, and a quiet declaration of power. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the soft clinking of jewelry and the ragged breaths of the terrified staff. The game had changed. The power dynamic had shifted, dramatically and irrevocably. The hunt was over. The reckoning had begun. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. The scent of polished mahogany and expensive perfume now felt acrid, a bitter reminder of the humiliation Anya had endured. Mr. Fitzwilliam, his face the color of old parchment, wrung his hands. The younger saleswoman, barely containing her sobs, stared at her polished shoes. Only David stood firm, his arm a comforting weight around Anya's shoulders. I don't understand," Mr. Fitzwilliam stammered, his voice trembling. We had no idea." His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were wide with a dawning terror. David's gaze, however, remained unwavering. "You had no idea she was my wife? Or that her grandmother's trust makes her the majority shareholder?" He spoke quietly, each word carrying the weight of suppressed fury. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, filled only with the faint ticking of a nearby clock. Anya, still reeling from the shock, felt a strange detachment. The anger was there, a simmering ember beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a deeper, more unsettling emotion: exhaustion. Years of suppressed insecurities, of constantly proving herself worthy, had finally culminated in this shattering moment. The younger saleswoman finally broke, a torrent of tears cascading down her face. We were so stupid," she sobbed, her voice barely a whisper. "We judged her by her clothes, by..." She trailed off, unable to articulate the depth of her prejudice. The older woman, her usual haughty demeanor gone, looked at Anya with raw, unadulterated fear. I am so sorry, Mrs. Davies," she mumbled, her voice choked with regret. The apology, though sincere, felt insufficient, a paltry offering in the face of the emotional devastation inflicted. Anya, seeing the genuine remorse in their eyes, felt a flicker of something akin to pity. It was a fragile emotion, easily extinguished, but it was there nonetheless. The weight of their fear was palpable, a suffocating blanket in the opulent silence of the store. The hunt was over, but the reckoning, as David had so powerfully stated, had just begun. The game had changed and Anya held all the cards. The silence hung heavy, thick as the velvet ropes that usually cordoned off the store's most precious jewels. The scent of expensive perfume, once alluring, now felt cloying, a suffocating reminder of Anya's humiliation. Mr. Fitzwilliam, his face ashen, wrung his hands, his usually impeccably manicured nails digging into his flesh. The younger saleswoman, her carefully applied makeup now smeared with tears, openly sobbed, her body shaking with a mixture of fear and regret. David's arm, a solid anchor around Anya, offered a silent reassurance. He hadn't released her since entering the store, his presence a powerful counterpoint to the shattered composure of the staff. Anya, however, felt strangely numb. The anger she expected to feel was muted, replaced by a profound exhaustion. An exhaustion born not just of the current situation, but of a lifetime of battling insecurity. I apologize profusely, Mrs. Davies," Mr. Fitzwilliam finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. "We had no idea. Absolutely no idea." His eyes darted to David, then back to Anya. A mixture of fear and genuine remorse etched on his face. "No idea she was my wife?" David's voice, though low, held an icy edge. "Or that her grandmother's inheritance makes her the majority shareholder of this entire chain?" The words hung in the air, each syllable sharp and precise, cutting through the oppressive silence. Anya watched, a detached observer in her own life. The weight of the revelation, the sudden shift in power dynamics, was almost too much to process. The years of feeling invisible, of having her intelligence and worth underestimated, crashed over her in a wave of delayed emotion. Tears welled in her eyes, not tears of anger, but of a profound, weary sadness. The younger saleswoman's sobs intensified. "We judged her by her clothes," she choked out, her voice thick with regret. "We were so unbelievably wrong." The older woman, her usual haughty demeanor utterly gone, merely stared at the floor, her face buried in her hands. Her carefully constructed facade of superiority had crumbled, revealing a frightened, ordinary woman underneath. The opulent setting of the store, once a symbol of aspiration, now felt like a gilded cage, trapping the staff in the suffocating consequences of their actions. The air thrummed with unspoken apologies and the chilling weight of newly revealed power. The hunt for a necklace had ended. But the reckoning, as David had subtly warned, was only just beginning. The silence stretched, thick and heavy like the velvet drapes lining the walls. The scent of lilies, usually a calming aroma, now felt suffocating. Anya stared at her reflection in a polished glass display case. A stranger staring back, eyes red-rimmed, face pale. The weight of the revelation pressed down. The power she held, so unexpected, felt alien and terrifying. David's hand, warm and reassuring, squeezed hers. I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice trembling. The opulent surroundings, once a symbol of unattainable luxury, now felt like a prison. David leaned in, his voice a low rumble. "We'll figure it out together. But first," his eyes hardened, "we deal with this." He gestured towards the cowering sales staff. Their fear, raw and palpable, was almost unsettling. Anya felt a strange detachment. The anger, she realized, wasn't a burning rage, but a cold, steady burn. It wasn't just about the humiliation. It was about years of being dismissed, overlooked, underestimated. This wasn't just about a necklace. It was about reclaiming her worth. A tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. This time, it wasn't a tear of shame, but a tear of defiance. I need some time, she finally said, her voice stronger, steadier. David nodded, his gaze unwavering. He understood. This wasn't just about punishing those who had wronged her. It was about Anya finding her own voice, her own strength. He kissed her forehead, a silent promise of support. Mr. Fitzwilliam, his face drained of color, stammered another apology. His words lost in the vastness of the unsettling silence. The younger saleswoman continued to weep silently, her body shaking. The older woman remained rigidly still, her face obscured by her hands, a statue of shame. Anya felt a strange mixture of pity and detached anger. She turned, leaving them in the suffocating silence of their own making, the glittering jewels reflecting a scene of profound regret and a power shift that echoed far beyond the confines of that luxury store. The reckoning, she knew, was only just beginning, but it would be her reckoning. The car ride was silent, the city lights blurring into streaks of color outside the window. Anya's reflection stared back from the darkened glass, a ghost in the muted glow. The weight of the afternoon pressed down, heavier than any necklace. David reached for her hand, his touch grounding, a silent reassurance in the suffocating quiet. "I'm not angry," Anya said, the words catching in her throat. The lie felt brittle, fragile as spun glass. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was something colder, deeper. A chilling awareness of the casual cruelty she'd faced. A lifetime of being unseen, unheard, dismissed. David squeezed her hand tighter. "You have every right to be." His voice was gentle, but the underlying strength was palpable. He knew her better than she knew herself sometimes. He understood the quiet devastation that simmered beneath her composed exterior. They pulled up to their apartment, the building a stark contrast to the opulent store. Home, a sanctuary, felt oddly distant tonight. The elevator ascended slowly, each floor a measured step away from the raw emotion of the afternoon. Inside, the apartment was warm and inviting, a haven of calm amid the storm brewing within her. Yet, the serenity felt fragile, a thin layer of ice over a churning sea. Anya sank onto the sofa, the plush cushions failing to absorb the weight of her despair. David sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. Anya looked at him, her eyes filled with a complex mix of hurt and a nascent power. "I don't know. Revenge? Firing them? It feels small." "It's understandable to feel that way," David said, his voice a soothing balm. "But what would truly make you feel better? What would make this right, not just for you, but for them?" The question hung in the air, a challenge, a path toward healing. Anya closed her eyes, the image of the cowering sales staff, the raw fear in their eyes, flashing before her. The weight of her power settled upon her, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. A chance to effect change, to weave a different narrative. A quiet resolve bloomed in her heart, replacing the bitter sting of humiliation with a cool, steady flame of purpose. The reckoning was indeed just beginning, but it wouldn't be one of retribution alone. It would be a reckoning of empathy, of understanding, of building something better from the ashes of hurt. The apartment felt suffocating. The scent of lilies, usually comforting, now clung to the air like a cloying sweetness, mirroring the nausea churning in Anya's stomach. David's presence, usually a soothing balm, felt like a silent weight beside her. He watched her, his gaze filled with a patient understanding that both comforted and frustrated her. Silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. "I keep seeing their faces," Anya finally whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum. The image of their sneering faces, the condescending smiles, flashed before her eyes, sharp and painful. David reached out, his hand covering hers. His touch was gentle, reassuring. "I know, but what do I do?" The question hung in the air, laden with uncertainty and a potent cocktail of anger and hurt. Revenge felt too easy, too small. It wouldn't fill the gaping hole left by their casual cruelty, their blatant disregard for her worth. "You have the power to do so much more," David said softly, his voice a low rumble that resonated with a quiet strength. He knew her well enough to know that simple retribution wouldn't suffice. Anya needed something more meaningful, something that would heal the wounds inflicted on her spirit. Anya closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The cool night air from the open window offered little respite from the internal turmoil. Outside, the city thrummed with life, a stark contrast to the stillness of their apartment. The weight of her inheritance pressed down, not as a crushing burden, but as a responsibility, a heavy cloak of power. She felt the potent energy, not as a weapon, but as a tool for change, a force to counteract the ugliness she had just witnessed. A quiet resolve settled in her heart, replacing the bitter sting of humiliation with a slow, steady burn of purpose. The reckoning was far from over. It was merely beginning, and it would be one of empowerment, not just revenge. The cool silk of her nightgown felt alien against her skin, a stark contrast to the rough wool of the store's carpet she still felt imprinted on her memory. The city lights, blurred through the window, cast long shadows across the room, mirroring the uncertainty swirling within her. David's hand, still warm from his comforting touch, rested on hers. "Revenge feels cheap," she murmured, her voice thick with unshed tears. The scent of lilies, so potent earlier, had faded, leaving behind a hollow emptiness. He squeezed her hand, his silence a testament to his understanding. He knew the casual cruelty she'd faced wasn't simply about a necklace. It was a reflection of a deeper societal injustice. "It's not about them," he said finally, his voice low and steady. "It's about you, Anya, about what you want to do with this power." The weight of her inheritance, once a crushing burden, now felt like a responsibility, a tool, not a weapon for vengeance, but a catalyst for change. The image of the sales associates' sneering faces flickered again, but now, overlaid with a nascent sense of purpose. She saw past their superficial cruelty to the deeper insecurities that likely fueled their actions. Could she forgive them? She wasn't sure yet, but she knew she couldn't let their actions define her. "I want to change things," she whispered, the words barely audible, but carrying the weight of a burgeoning resolve. The silence that followed was different now. It hummed with a quiet energy, a promise of action. The city lights outside seemed brighter, less blurred, as if reflecting the clarity emerging within her. The decision hadn't been a simple one, but a slow, steady burn of purpose. The reckoning was far from over, but this time, it felt less like a confrontation and more like a transformation. A chance to rebuild not just for herself but for others. The journey ahead would be challenging, but Anya felt, for the first time, truly empowered. The taste of bitterness was still there, but now it was mingled with the sweetness of hope. The scent of lilies, a constant reminder of the opulent store, now felt suffocating. Anya stared at the ceiling, the ornate molding a mocking contrast to the turmoil within her. David's hand, still warm in hers, offered a fragile anchor in the storm. "Revenge? It feels so small," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The weight of her inheritance pressed down, a leaden cloak against her heart. It wasn't just about punishing those women. It was about something larger, something she couldn't yet articulate. David tightened his grip. "It's not about making them suffer, Anya. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." His words, simple yet profound, resonated deeply. He understood. He always did. She closed her eyes, replaying the scene. The smirks, the whispers, the blatant disregard. The sting of their words was still raw, but a new feeling, a simmering heat of purpose, was beginning to rise. It wasn't about retribution. It was about change. A quiet revolution starting within the walls of her own family's company. "I need to teach them," she finally said, her voice gaining strength. "Not through punishment, but through understanding." The idea formed slowly, a delicate seed taking root in the fertile ground of her hurt. She would use her power not as a weapon, but as a tool to reshape the culture of the company, to cultivate empathy and respect, to ensure no other woman would ever face the humiliation she endured. The plan began to unfold, each detail a deliberate step towards a brighter future. The night was still young, but the darkness was beginning to recede, replaced by a fragile dawn of hope. The weight of her inheritance didn't feel quite so heavy anymore. Felt empowering. The mahogany of David's study felt cool beneath Anya's fingertips. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the Persian rug, a stark contrast to the cold indifference she'd encountered earlier. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. The scent of old leather and pipe tobacco, usually comforting, now felt suffocating. "It's not just about the necklace, is it?" David finally said, his voice low and gentle. He reached for her hand, his touch firm but reassuring. Anya shook her head, tears welling. They looked at me like I was nothing, like I didn't belong, like I was invisible. The memory of their dismissive stares, the cruel whispers, clawed at her. "And they were wrong," David stated, his voice hardening with righteous anger. So wrong." He pulled her close, his embrace meeting Anya's, a silent communication passing between them. A flicker of pride warmed Anya's heart. Anya felt a surge of power, not as a weapon, but as a tool for positive change. The necklace, once a symbol of her insecurity, now represented her journey. Felt lighter, almost insignificant. The sting of their cruelty had faded, replaced by a quiet determination to use her experience to empower others. Her journey was far from over. It was just beginning. The healing had started, but the real work, building a future free from such prejudice, lay ahead. The quiet hum of the air conditioning couldn't mask the tremor in Anya's hands as she wrote the first check. It was a substantial sum, far exceeding the cost of the necklace, earmarked for the Anya David Foundation, a foundation dedicated to supporting women from disadvantaged backgrounds. David watched her, his expression a mix of pride and quiet understanding. The opulent boardroom, usually intimidating, felt strangely comforting tonight. "This is more than I expected," David said softly, his voice barely a whisper in the vast space. Anya smiled, a fragile thing, but genuine. "It's not just about the money, David. It's about making a difference. About ensuring no other woman feels the way I did in that store." The memory still stung, a raw nerve beneath the surface of her newfound strength. "I know," David replied, his gaze unwavering. He reached across the polished mahogany table, his fingers gently brushing hers. "And you're doing it with such grace and power, my love. You've shown them what true strength is." The weight of the past few weeks pressed down on them, a shared burden forged in fire and tempered by love. The incident in the store had been a turning point, a harsh lesson that had ultimately revealed Anya's inner resilience and the depth of their love. Later, surrounded by the comforting warmth of their apartment, Anya traced the delicate chain of her necklace, the diamonds sparkling faintly in the dim light. It was a simple piece, but it held a profound significance, a symbol not of insecurity, but of triumph. The initial hurt lingered, a phantom ache, but it was slowly fading, replaced by a quiet satisfaction. Her journey wasn't solely about punishing those who had wronged her. It was about building something positive, something lasting. The foundation was her testament to that resolve, a living monument to her strength. The healing was underway, but the work, the truly fulfilling work, had only just begun. The polished marble floor felt cool beneath Anya's bare feet. Sunlight streamed through the vast windows of the store, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a silent testament to the passage of time. It had been weeks since the incident, weeks of turmoil and transformation. The air, once thick with the suffocating scent of expensive perfume and disdain, now held a faint, almost imperceptible undercurrent of something different, a tentative hope. She saw Ms. Dubois, one of the sales associates, arranging a display of diamond earrings. Ms. Dubois's posture was different, straighter, less self-assured. Anya approached, her heart beating a hesitant rhythm against her ribs. Ms. Dubois looked up, her eyes widening slightly before settling into a hesitant, almost apologetic gaze. The sharp, condescending edge that had been so prominent before was gone, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. "Ms. Anya," Ms. Dubois began, her voice barely above a whisper. The tremor in her voice was palpable. I wanted to apologize again. For everything." Anya nodded, the memory of the humiliation still a phantom ache. "I accept your apology, Ms. Dubois," she said, her voice calm but firm. The sunlight caught the delicate gold chain of her necklace, a simple yet elegant piece, a reminder of her strength. "The training, it's been eye-opening," Ms. Dubois continued, fidgeting with a diamond pendant. "We didn't understand. We were so blinded by assumptions." Anya studied Ms. Dubois's face, searching for genuine remorse. She saw it, a flicker of shame, a true understanding of the depth of her transgression. It wasn't merely a performance, it felt genuine. "I know," Anya said softly, "and I appreciate that you've taken the steps to learn and grow." She paused, a thoughtful expression settling on her face. "The foundation is making progress, too. We're already helping women overcome obstacles similar to what I faced." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. The transformation wasn't just hers. It was rippling outward, touching the lives of others. The sting of the past had begun to heal, leaving behind a resilience stronger than before. The store, once a symbol of her insecurity, was now a silent witness to her empowerment. This was closure, not a vengeful retribution, but a quiet, powerful affirmation of her journey. The air felt lighter now, infused with the promise of a brighter future. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and the quiet hum of change within the company. David, ever supportive, held Anya's hand through the turbulent waters of corporate restructuring and public relations. He listened patiently as she recounted her past insecurities, the sting of their echoes still sharp. Their shared evenings were filled with whispered confidences and the comforting weight of shared vulnerability. One such evening, nestled on their plush sofa, a fire crackling softly in the hearth, David reached for Anya's hand. "You've shown incredible strength, my love," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "More than I ever knew you possessed." Anya leaned against him, the warmth of his body a comforting balm. "It wasn't strength alone, David," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "It was the realization that my silence had been my own worst enemy. That insecurity isn't a weakness, but a challenge to overcome." A tear traced a path down her cheek, but it wasn't a tear of self-pity. It was a tear of release. The following days were dedicated to the foundation she'd established. The initial donations had poured in, a wave of support propelled by the media coverage of her story. The office, buzzing with activity, was a stark contrast to the sterile silence of the jewelry store. Here, amidst the scent of fresh coffee and the excited chatter of her team, Anya felt a sense of purpose she'd never known before. She found herself mentoring young women, sharing her story, empowering them to find their own voices, their own strength. She saw in their eyes the reflection of her own past self, the hesitant hope flickering within. Each success, each woman she helped, was a small victory against the lingering shadows of her past. The soft glow of the laptop illuminated her face as she reviewed the foundation's progress. A wave of exhaustion washed over her, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes from purposeful action. She looked at the photograph on her desk, a smiling picture of her grandmother, her eyes twinkling with mischief and determination. The woman who had built the empire and, unwittingly, paved the path for Anya's own self-discovery. It was a path fraught with peril, yet ultimately leading her to a place of immeasurable strength and profound self-acceptance. The journey had been arduous, but the destination was breathtakingly beautiful. Anya closed her eyes, feeling the quiet contentment settle deep within her soul. She knew, with absolute certainty, that this was only the beginning. The soft glow of the morning sun, filtering through the sheer curtains, painted stripes of gold across Anya's face. She woke to the quiet weight of David's arm around her, the warmth a comforting anchor after the storm of the previous weeks. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open to meet hers. "Morning, sleepyhead," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," she replied, a faint smile playing on her lips. The lingering bitterness of the incident at the store was fading, replaced by a quiet confidence. She felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years, a freedom born not from revenge, but from self-acceptance. "Ready to face the day?" David asked, his fingers tracing the delicate curve of her jawline. Anya nodded. "Ready to build something better," she corrected, a surge of purpose filling her. Today was the official launch of her foundation. The office, a vibrant space filled with the buzz of activity and the scent of fresh coffee, was a stark contrast to the sterile opulence of the jewelry store. Here, amongst the determined faces of her team, she felt a sense of belonging, a camaraderie fueled by shared purpose. Later that day, surrounded by the excited chatter of potential beneficiaries, Anya found herself watching a young woman, hesitant and uncertain, much like her former self. The young woman's eyes held a familiar flicker of insecurity, mirroring Anya's own past self-doubt. Anya approached her, offering a gentle smile and a kind word. The conversation that followed was filled with shared vulnerabilities, a testament to the healing power of shared experience. In that moment, Anya understood the true meaning of her journey, not just overcoming her own adversity, but extending a hand to guide others through their own dark valleys. The weight of her grandmother's legacy, once a burden, now felt like a mantle of responsibility, a powerful tool for positive change. The day ended with a sense of quiet accomplishment, a quiet hum of satisfaction resonating within her. David's arm around her shoulders as they walked home, his silent support a testament to their shared journey, solidified her belief that the future, though uncertain, held infinite possibilities. The air in the store, once suffocating with the weight of their disdain, now felt strangely lighter. Anya ran a hand over the cool, smooth surface of the necklace, the same necklace that had become a symbol of her humiliation. It felt different now, imbued with a new significance. "It's beautiful," she murmured, the words barely audible. David squeezed her hand, his silent understanding a balm to her still raw wounds. The scent of polished wood and expensive perfume no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it hung in the air like a forgotten memory. "They're different," David observed, his gaze sweeping over the sales staff, who hovered awkwardly at a distance, their usual arrogance replaced by a tentative, almost fearful politeness. Their averted gazes, the nervous fidgeting of their hands, spoke volumes. Anya saw a flicker of genuine regret in the eyes of the woman who had been the most cruel. "Different, yes," Anya agreed softly, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. The lingering sting of their insults still pricked, but it was dulled now, softened by the realization of her own strength. The quiet hum of the store, a stark contrast to the earlier tension, felt oddly comforting. The soft chime of the door as a customer entered seemed to punctuate the shift in atmosphere. Later, in the quiet intimacy of their home, surrounded by the comforting warmth of candlelight and the low murmur of jazz music, Anya finally allowed herself to cry. Not tears of self-pity, but tears of release, of finally shedding the weight of years of insecurity. David held her close, his embrace a silent testament to their unwavering bond. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have seen it. I should have protected you." "You did?" Anya whispered back, her voice choked with emotion. "You always do." The weight of her grandmother's legacy, once a crushing burden, now felt like a source of strength, a tool to reshape her life and the lives of others. Their shared vulnerability, a raw honesty forged in the crucible of their experience, deepened their love and cemented their resolve to use their power for good. The future stretched before them, not as a daunting unknown but as a canvas of infinite possibilities. The champagne flutes, chilled to perfection, felt cool against Anya's fingertips. David's hand, warm and reassuring, covered hers. The city lights twinkled, a glittering backdrop to their private rooftop celebration. The air hummed with a quiet joy, a stark contrast to the bitter sting of their earlier ordeal. "To new beginnings," David said, his voice low and tender. He raised his glass, his eyes reflecting the city's brilliance. Anya met his gaze, a faint smile gracing her lips. The memory of the store, of the sneering saleswomen, still lingered, a phantom pain beneath the surface joy. But it was muted now, softened by the overwhelming sense of relief, of vindication. "To new beginnings," she echoed, her voice catching slightly. She took a sip of the champagne, the crisp bubbles a welcome contrast to the bitter taste of humiliation she'd swallowed earlier. The soft jazz music drifted from the hidden speakers, a soothing balm to her still recovering spirit. She looked out at the panoramic view, the sprawling cityscape a testament to the power she now wielded, a power she never sought, yet one she intended to use responsibly. The necklace, nestled safely in her jewelry box downstairs, no longer held the weight of their scorn. It symbolized a turning point, a transformation from victim to victor. David leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "I'm so proud of you, Anya," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. The words, simple yet profound, resonated deeply within her. His pride, his unwavering support, was the most precious gift of all. He understood her strength, her vulnerability, the complexities of the woman she was becoming. "It wasn't easy," Anya confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. The memories, the tears, the shame, the crushing weight of insecurity surfaced again, a bittersweet reminder of her journey. But this time, the pain held no power over her. It was a testament to her resilience, a badge of honor. "But we did it together," she added, squeezing his hand. Their shared triumph, their shared vulnerability, had forged an unbreakable bond. Their love, tested by fire, emerged stronger than ever before. The future, once daunting and uncertain, now shimmered with hope, brimming with possibilities. The champagne, the music, the city lights, all were mere adornments to the profound joy blooming within their hearts. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse apartment, illuminating dust motes dancing in the golden rays. Anya awoke to the gentle scent of David's cologne, a familiar comfort. He was already awake, sitting on the balcony, a steaming mug in his hands. The city stretched before him, a breathtaking panorama. "Morning," he murmured, turning as she approached. His eyes, usually sparkling with mischief, held a tender concern. "Sleep well." "Fitfully," Anya admitted, settling beside him. The memory of the previous day's humiliation still clung to her, a damp chill despite the warmth of the rising sun. The champagne helped. "It did its job," David smiled, his hand finding hers. "But we still need to deal with." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The fallout." Anya nodded, a knot tightening in her stomach. The thought of facing the employees again, even with her newfound power, filled her with a mixture of trepidation and resolve. The city sounds, distant sirens, the rumble of traffic, seemed to echo the turmoil within her. "They'll apologize," David assured, his voice strong, a reassuring counterpoint to her anxieties. "But it's not just about apologies, is it?" Anya looked out at the cityscape, its vastness mirroring the scope of her impending task. "It's about making sure this never happens again," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle hum of the city. "It's about changing the culture, not just punishing the individuals." She felt a surge of purpose, a determination to transform the negative experience into something positive. The necklace, a symbol of her past insecurity, now felt like a weight lifted. A new dawn had broken. Their new beginnings truly began now. The penthouse suite felt vast and echoing despite their presence. Anya traced the rim of her champagne flute, the cool crystal a stark contrast to the warmth of David's hand resting on her back. The city lights, a glittering tapestry below, did little to soothe the simmering anger within her. "They looked at me like I was nothing," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. David pulled her closer, his embrace a silent reassurance. I know, my love. I saw it in their eyes. The smugness, the disdain. It was infuriating. He paused, his gaze intense. But it's over now. They don't know who you are. Anya managed a weak smile, a flicker of something akin to triumph in her eyes. Not anymore. They'll know. The champagne tasted metallic, the sweetness a cruel irony to the bitterness still clinging to her heart. The necklace, the reason for this entire ordeal, lay forgotten on her dresser. It was insignificant now, overshadowed by the seismic shift in her life. He kissed her temple, a tender gesture that spoke volumes. Tomorrow, he said softly, we'll face them, together. The word, together, resonated, a comforting promise amidst the storm. The prospect of confronting the staff, of wielding the power she hadn't known she possessed, filled her with a strange mix of dread and exhilaration. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her self-worth. It was about ensuring that no other woman would suffer the same humiliation. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders, heavy yet strangely empowering. The city lights, once a symbol of the vast indifference she'd felt, now shimmered with the potential for change, a reflection of the power she held in her hands. The penthouse suite, a sanctuary of glass and steel overlooking the city, hummed with a low thrum of energy. Anya, curled on the plush sofa, felt the weight of the past day pressing down on her. The champagne, barely touched, sat beside her, a silent witness to her silent turmoil. David, sensing her quiet distress, knelt beside her, his touch gentle, his gaze filled with unwavering support. The city lights, a breathtaking spectacle from their vantage point, seemed to mirror the turmoil in her heart. A chaotic blend of brilliance and shadow. It's not just the necklace, is it? David whispered, his voice a soothing balm against the storm within her. Anya shook her head, tears finally escaping, tracing a path down her cheeks. It's everything. All those years of feeling invisible, like my opinion didn't matter, like I wasn't good enough. The words, choked with emotion, hung heavy in the air. David pulled her close, his embrace a haven of warmth and security. You are enough, Anya. More than enough. They were blind, foolish. They couldn't see the strength, the brilliance, the incredible woman you are. His voice resonated with conviction, a powerful antidote to the poison of doubt that had festered within her for so long. He stroked her hair, his touch gentle but firm, conveying a reassuring strength. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the unspoken understanding between two souls deeply connected. The city lights, once a distant spectacle, now felt closer, more intimate, as if sharing witness to their shared vulnerability and blossoming strength. The bitterness of the day was slowly giving way to a quiet acceptance, a growing sense of empowerment. Anya leaned into his warmth, finding solace in his presence. The future, once uncertain, now seemed to shimmer with the potential for a new beginning, a brighter dawn. The necklace, forgotten on the dresser, was no longer a symbol of humiliation, but a reminder of the power she now possessed. The power to change, to heal, to empower. The journey ahead was daunting, but she was ready, stronger now, with David at her side. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the penthouse's floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the room in a warm, golden hue. Anya woke nestled against David, the lingering scent of his cologne a comforting presence. But the peace was fragile. The memory of yesterday's humiliation clung to her like a shadow. She felt the phantom sting of their dismissive words, the cold weight of their unconcealed disdain. David stirred, his arm tightening around her. "Morning, sleepyhead," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. He kissed her forehead, a gentle gesture that spoke volumes. "How are you feeling?" Anya hesitated. "Better," she whispered, the word a tentative promise. "But I keep replaying it in my head. Their faces, their words." A shudder ran through her. "I know," David said, his voice laced with understanding. He sat up, pulling her with him. "But remember what happened after. Remember how they looked when they found out the truth. Their faces. They were a mirror of their own shallowness. Anya looked at him, a flicker of a smile touching her lips. They were terrified, she admitted, a small laugh escaping. Absolutely terrified. The memory brought a surge of satisfaction, a quiet thrill of power, but it was quickly replaced by a wave of sadness. It still hurts, though. It makes me question things. My worth, my judgment. David took her hand, his touch reassuring. You have nothing to question, Anya. Their actions were a reflection of them, not you. Your worth is immeasurable, independent of their opinions. Don't let their small-mindedness diminish you. He paused, his gaze intense. This is about more than just a necklace, isn't it? It's about them learning a lesson, but it's also about you reclaiming your power, about finding your voice. Anya nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on her face. The city stretched below them, a breathtaking panorama of steel and glass, a fitting backdrop to the quiet revolution brewing within her. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since yesterday, Anya felt a glimmer of hope, a powerful surge of self-belief beginning to push back the shadows of doubt. The necklace, she realized, was a mere symbol. The Real prize was the newfound strength she held within. The impact of Anya's actions resonated far beyond the hushed apologies of the sales staff. News of the incident, subtly leaked by a sympathetic employee, spread like wildfire through the company. Whispers turned to hushed conversations, then open discussions about diversity and ethical conduct. The once ostentatious displays of wealth within the company felt jarringly out of place against the backdrop of this newfound introspection. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and polished wood, now carried an undercurrent of unease, a tangible shift in the power dynamic. David, watching Anya from across their penthouse suite, saw the change in her. The fragile peace of the previous morning had solidified into a quiet strength. They've started diversity training, Anya said, her voice low, a hint of satisfaction in her tone. Not just a token program, but a real commitment. The city lights glittered outside their window, mirroring the sparkle in her eyes. And they're revamping their customer service protocols. No more judging a book by its cover. David smiled, his heart swelling with pride. I knew you'd handle it with grace, but still, I'm amazed. He reached for her hand, his touch grounding, familiar. You've not only made them accountable, but you've turned this whole ordeal into something positive. Anya leaned her head against his shoulder, a sigh escaping her lips. It wasn't easy, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The anger, the hurt, it was overwhelming at first. She traced the lines of his palm with her fingertip. But David, seeing them truly understand, seeing their genuine remorse, that's powerful. That's what matters. The weight of the past few days seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of quiet accomplishment. The lingering scent of rain outside their window mingled with the comforting aroma of brewing coffee, a sense of calm settling over them both. The fight was far from over, but they stood together, stronger, their love a beacon in the aftermath of the storm. The news spread organically, a quiet revolution brewing beneath the polished veneer of the jewelry chain. Anya, watching the city lights paint the night sky from her penthouse, felt the weight of her actions settle. It wasn't just about the sales associates. Their behavior was a symptom of a larger systemic issue. David, sensing her quiet contemplation, poured 2 glasses of wine. It's not over, he said softly, his voice a comforting balm. No, Anya agreed, swirling the ruby liquid in her glass. The scent of ripe berries filled the air, a stark contrast to the sterile scent of the store. But it's a start. They're implementing mandatory diversity and inclusion training across all branches. A real commitment, not a PR stunt. The quiet hum of the city felt different now, charged with a subtle energy. The weight of her inheritance, initially a source of anxiety, now felt like a responsibility, a tool for positive change. A wave of exhaustion washed over her, but it wasn't the crippling fatigue of self-doubt. This was the weariness of purpose fulfilled, of a battle fought, and a victory won not through retribution, but through transformation. "You showed them," David said, his hand finding hers across the low table. His eyes, usually sparkling with playful mischief, held a deep well of admiration. "You showed them the power of empathy, the importance of respect." Anya smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, banishing the lingering shadows of insecurity. The necklace, the initial catalyst for this whirlwind, remained unworn. It no longer symbolized her vulnerability. It represented the turning point, the moment she discovered her own strength. The city lights, a glittering tapestry outside their window, seemed to reflect the newfound sparkle in her eyes, a testament to her resilience, her strength, and her unwavering belief in the power of change. The future felt uncertain, but this time, the uncertainty felt less daunting, more like an exciting adventure, one she was ready to embark on, hand in hand with her husband, her heart brimming with hope. The ripple effect of Anya's actions was subtle at first, a tremor in the polished facade of the jewelry chain. Then it became a wave. Newspapers featured articles praising their new diversity initiative, highlighting the company's commitment to ethical practices. The once sterile atmosphere of the flagship store, where Anya had experienced such profound humiliation, now felt different, lighter, infused with a sense of cautious optimism. The staff, once condescending, now greeted customers with a genuine warmth, their interactions reflecting a newfound awareness. David, watching Anya from across their sun-drenched penthouse, noticed the change in her. The fragility that had clung to her after the incident was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence that radiated from her like the morning sun. "It's amazing," he said, his voice filled with a quiet pride that mirrored her own. He gestured towards the city sprawled beneath them, a shimmering expanse of steel and glass. "You've changed things, Anya. Really changed things." Anya smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that touched her eyes. "I just wanted them to understand," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "To see the impact of their actions, not just on me, but on everyone." She paused, taking a sip of her tea, the warmth spreading through her. It wasn't about revenge. It was about respect, about making sure no one else feels the way I did that day. The memory lingered, a phantom pain, but it no longer held the power to wound her. It was a scar, a reminder of her strength, the strength she hadn't known she possessed. The city lights twinkled, mirroring the newfound sparkle in her eyes. Their journey hadn't been easy, but they had emerged stronger, their love deepened by the shared experience, forged in the crucible of adversity and refined by the fires of transformation. The future remained unwritten, but for the first time, Anya felt truly ready to face it, head held high, her heart brimming with hope and the quiet satisfaction of a battle won not through retribution, but through empathy, understanding, and the unwavering belief in the power of change. The news spread like wildfire. Anya's story, initially whispered in hushed tones among employees, became a national headline. The article, splashed across the front page of the Daily Chronicle, featured a picture of Anya, radiant in a simple but elegant dress, a far cry from the woman who'd entered that store weeks ago, filled with insecurity. The article detailed the events, focusing not on the scandal, but on Anya's quiet strength and her commitment to fostering a more inclusive environment. David watched Anya read the article, a gentle smile playing on his lips. He saw the quiet pride in her eyes, the subtle shift in her posture, a newfound confidence that settled deep within her bones. "They're calling you a modern-day heroine," he murmured, reaching across the table to take her hand. His touch was warm, comforting. Anya chuckled, a soft, breathy sound. "Heroine? I just wanted them to understand the impact of their actions." She squeezed his hand, her gaze lingering on the newspaper photo. "It's strange, isn't it? The power of a simple act of kindness, or the lack thereof." The memory of the stinging humiliation still lingered, but now it was tempered with a sense of accomplishment, of having used her position to effect real change. The sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The city stretched out before them, a vast panorama of life and opportunity. Anya felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet contentment that settled deep within her soul. This wasn't just about the necklace or the condescending sales staff. It was about her journey, her growth, and the power she discovered within herself. The journey had been painful, but it had led her to a place of strength and resilience she hadn't known existed. And that, she realized, was a legacy worth more than any jewel. The boardroom hummed with quiet efficiency. Sunlight, filtered through the high windows, cast long shadows across the polished mahogany table.